Hey everyone. Welcome to session number 2 of Admissions ABCs for POCs. We're excited that you're with us this evening. My name is Brinkley. I am the Assistant Vice President of Undergraduate Admissions at Columbia College Chicago. I've been in admissions now for 10, 11 years or so, and excited to be here with you all this evening. I figure maybe all of our panelists will reintroduce ourselves, just knowing that there may be some folks on this session that was not with us last week. So Ralph, you want to take us away next?
Sure, thank you. I'm Ralph Figueroa. I'm Dean of College Guidance at Albuquerque Academy here in New Mexico. So I work on the high school side for about the past 19 years now. I also spent 10 years on the college side before this. So I'm kind of bringing perspectives from both sides of the desk and also legal perspective as well. I don't practice now, but I am a member of the California Bar, graduate of UCLA Law School.
Hi, I'm Tamara Siler. I'm Deputy Director of Admission at Rice University, Houston, Texas. My work is specializing in access and inclusion, but I work throughout the office and am a decision maker in the office. So this is I'm finishing my 27th year as a member of the Rice admission staff and about to start year number 28. I think that's it for me. I'm really excited to be here with y'all tonight.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Darryl Jones, Senior Associate Director of Admission with a few other titles, but I am at Gettysburg College in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and this is year 35. So just like my fellow panelists and friends, I am so glad that you joined us this evening, and we are all looking forward to sharing this evening.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you all, my friends, for sharing a little bit about yourselves. This is the second session out of 4 that we are doing, geared towards folks who identify as folks of color within the admissions field. And kind of, we wanted to put together some topics to really kind of talk through how to aid us, kind of as a crew, as a people, as we kind of navigate this field in this industry and in this upcoming year. And so we've got hopefully some good information for you all this evening that should help kind of navigate help you kind of navigate your role as a person of color within this field. Our first session last week was very much kind of it really was kind of a great way for us to kick off. There's a lot of great questions about what does it mean to be a person of color in this field? How do we navigate that? How do we go through that? Tonight is going to be slightly different than last week. Last week was a lot of Q&A and back and forth, and there will still be Q&A and back and forth this evening. That's not going to end or not going to change this evening. But this evening, we're really going to focus on what does it really mean to be a person of color while out traveling on the road? And one of the things that we know as we go into this upcoming year is that this upcoming recruitment cycle, I think, is going to be unlike any other recruitment cycle we have had in recent memory, right? There may not be an on the road really this year, but we know that every college, every university is going to be doing something slightly different for this upcoming year. And so we wanted to still make sure that we got together and really talked through what it means to be a person of color on the road. A couple of things just to share with folks before we begin. There is a question and answer feature. So as we're going through the PowerPoint, it's a very short, like 5 or 6 slide PowerPoint. We're really going to spend a lot of time talking. But as we go through the PowerPoint, if you do have questions, you can use the question and answer feature, and we will address those as we go through the PowerPoint. Always feel free to stop us if something doesn't make sense, if you have additional questions, if you have comments, if you have stories that you want to share. We want this to be a session that is interactive, so we want to make sure that we are hearing your voices as we go through the session tonight as well. We've got about an hour and a half, so we've got plenty of time here to be able to talk through what it is that we kind of want to share with you all this evening. So Ralph, anything that I missed from that in terms of ground rules? I think that's...
Yeah, no, just really glad you encourage folks to speak up if they want us to specify things or clarify things. but we are going to be going over some guidelines, some suggestions. These are not rules. These are just sort of words of wisdom, things that we've thought through, things that we've talked about amongst ourselves that we think will be useful to you, and put it in a way that's systematic and deals with all the different topics you'll have as you travel someday.
Someday. One of these days. So to kind of start off with, we actually do want to ask a question, and we'd love for your answers in the chat box, if you don't mind. But we're really curious, what are your travel plans this fall? Do you have an idea or an understanding of what travel is going to look like at your institution this fall? So I'll give folks just a moment if you want to type something out in the chat box to give us just a little bit of an understanding of what your plans are. If you know what your plans might be for this upcoming fall, I think that will give us some really great information as we go through the session. So I'll give folks a minute and let us know what your plans are this fall.
Yeah, and as folks are doing that, I'll let you know that from my perspective at Albuquerque Academy here in New Mexico, we have definitely decided that we're not going to have any on-campus college rep visits. We're going to do them all via Zoom. And we're going to set up a time where we will have, maybe up to three reps at a time, being able to talk with students. But we just thought we're just so uneasy what our plans are. We have plans for being in person, plans for being virtual, plans for a hybrid. We just thought, let's just keep it clean with the reps and just ask no reps to come this year. So if you're planning to travel to Albuquerque, I won't be seeing you on campus.
We've got one person, Caitlin says they're not traveling this fall, all things virtual. Darryl's sharing from his perspective. Darryl, anything you want to say out loud in terms of kind of what you all are doing?
Well, first, and this is not political, but we're all about science. And so we kind of figured that, just like our buddy Ralph said, even if we are able to travel, very few places would actually hold events on their campuses, because I know that many of my private secondary school colleagues are saying, well, look, we're not even sure we're going to allow parents into the building unless there's an absolute emergency. So, a lot of it is we're going to remain flexible. We're hoping that this thing works out. But for now, what colleges and universities are doing is innovating and using a bunch of different platforms that allow us to do things different from Zoom. And as I talk to colleagues from other colleges and universities, we're no longer being reactive like we were in March and April. Now everybody gets to be proactive, and that proactivity will lead to some interesting possibilities, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Tamara, what are y'all gonna do this fall?
Well, even if we were going to travel, my travel territory is New York, and we're, they're not even gonna let us in from Texas. So, can't take a recruitment trip and have to quarantine for 2 weeks. And of course, but of course, also, I think in general, all of the schools would have a lot more to deal with than having to usher some reps through the building in New York. So I think the challenge will be not overdoing it with the virtual events, because I think just because we are virtual now, there may be more pressure to set for schools to say, oh, can you do this visit? And can you do this visit? And I love the fact that it is going to open up the opportunity to do visits with schools where we've never had a chance to go, because of data and data-driven travel, or that rural schools and things like that. So if I'm going to make some choices, I'm probably going to say, if I'm going to do some virtual visits, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to do things with schools where I've never had a chance to support them. So
yeah, absolutely. I think it's go on, Ralph.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. Let's not overdo the virtual stuff. And again, you say it very eloquently and to the point and succinctly. The kids are really saturated. Doing classes online all day is really taxing. And at the academy, we're doing a modified block program, so they'll have two 2-hour classes each day, and that's about as much as any teenager is going to be able to handle. So let's give them a little bit of a break too. I think that's good advice in general.
Yeah, it's funny because I was speaking with one of our vendors that we use today, talking to the Hobson's folks. And that was a question that I had was, what are other colleges, universities doing group travel? And when I say travel, I'm putting that in quotes here for this fall. But, are there ways in which that we can, as colleagues, as friends, partner together as we move into this fall recruitment season, so that students hopefully maybe aren't saturated as much? Because I think that it's a really great point. I think about there are schools that we do really well at Columbia in terms of recruiting students, but they are schools that we typically have not gotten a chance to visit in the past, right? And so thinking about, okay, this is actually a great opportunity to be able to do that. And so I wonder if someone like Ralph is going to be entertaining, maybe, on a normal year, you have 100 visitors over the course of the year. Are you now going to be trying to set up 200 or 300 Zoom sessions? Because now we're in this age where it makes it easier to do this kind of stuff because we've gotten so used to it and what that means and what that might look like.
Yeah, no, and in the spring, we closed our school on March 12th, and we had several major programs for our juniors who were going to be seniors that we converted to webinar programs, and we decided that that format worked really well for our students and our families, and so we're going to keep that going forward. Even if we're in person teaching, our major evening programs are going to be Zoom webinars. So is this going to have a similar impact on travel? Is some of this stuff here to stay? And I think that might be a separate conversation and might get us sidetracked, but I think that just the impact overall on college travel is something that's worth thinking about.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, so we'll move into the formal PowerPoint portion of it. Again, a lot of what we really tried to focus on was travel, in case that there are folks here that are traveling. And again, I'm seeing, Katie from Bryant saying no travel by flight, no travel to hotspot states. So if you're reading between the lines, it looks like that might be virtual probably this year. You've got Jen who's saying all virtual recruitment and no on-campus sessions. Which I know next week, I think Tamara and Darryl will focus a little bit more on kind of our, being persons of color within the office and what that looks like and how that, kind of what that means. And so, yeah, so we're going to still focus a little bit on travel. These will be good tips and tricks, hopefully, that you can use, maybe not this fall recruitment cycle, maybe the spring recruitment cycle, maybe, next fall, there may be some opportunities for you all to use some of these tips and tricks. So, so when we really kind of think about kind of high school and student-facing travel, right? So maybe some of you might be on the transfer side, maybe you're working with students who are getting a second BA, whatever that might be. When you think about that student-facing travel first, there's a few things that we kind of put together and really kind of wanted to talk through. And the first thing that I really wanted to talk through was safety first. What does that mean to really be safe on the road as a person of color as we navigate, especially now this world that we're in after George Floyd, kind of this post George Floyd world, where I do feel like, at least for me, I'm seeing a little bit of people starting to maybe wake up a little bit. And, I think that, and this is my own personal thing, I think that George Floyd and COVID had to happen at the same time. I really do. I think that we as a society and as a world had to calm down, had to slow down, had to take a step back in our lives through COVID. And now you've got George Floyd compounding and Breonna Taylor and all these other folks kind of compounding on top of that. And I think people actually now have an opportunity to pay attention. And so I think that we're really in an interesting kind of space at this point in time. But I think that, obviously as persons of color, we have to really figure out and keep our safety first. And so, some of the things that, we always, or at least I always tend to tell my staff is, especially if they are persons of color, making sure they're being careful where they stay. Number one, like if you have hotel travel that you need to do, if you are traveling and, say you've got a college fair that ends at 8:30 at night in a town and you need to make it to the next town, sometimes I tell folks, maybe you stay at the, the larger of the two towns that you're kind of fluctuating between, right? You're really making sure that you are taking care of yourself and you're not driving late at night. I don't like when my team travels late at night, especially my folks of color, especially if they're driving in between different towns and cities and such. You don't want to be the person having to stop for gas at a rural gas station, right? It's things like that that I always encourage my team to really pay attention to. So make sure you're not staying in small towns. I never, 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 ever want my staff to stay at hotels that have exterior hallways, right? I'm always about, it needs to be an interior hallway at that hotel. You need to be a Hampton Inn, a Holiday Inn Express. You need to be at kind of what that is. And I think Tamara really puts a good point there in the chat. It's a balance of what's safer, right? Is it, what city is safer for you? Is it the safety of driving at night? Sometimes you got to weigh those things. Tamara, do you want to jump in maybe with some elaboration on that point?
Sure. I mean, I'm just drawing from my own, experiences. And I'm, when I was younger, driving at night, and plus you get told that, especially if you have an early morning visit or 7:30 visit, you need to be in the city where that visit is taking place. And so, but then, if you're in some country area where there's no lights, you don't know the area, and there is some place to stay. Sometimes I'd much rather drive early, get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and drive to where I need to be. Either way, your car could break down. I'd much rather my car break down at 6 a.m. than my car break down at 10 p.m. in an area where I'm not familiar.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, really got to pay attention to that. Again, like I said, the hotel thing for me is, I think, just huge. Like, I don't have people stay at motels. I make sure that, again, I would rather pay a little bit of extra money from our budget to make sure that our team's staying safe, versus have someone think, oh, I got to stick to the guidelines that are outlined in our travel policy, or I've got to do this, I've got to do that, because if not, my supervisor's going to be upset. You really, I think, especially as a person of color, you've got to have that agency in order to really, really, really do that. And to Darryl's point, Darryl, say that out loud, please, for the folks.
I might have to say it twice, Brother Darryl, but look. There's always this thought that there is a balancing act between budget and safety. No, there isn't. Your safety is number one. Your safety is paramount. However many other ways you want to put it, your safety is your safety. Now, it might be that you are one of few more melanated people on your staff, and there, Ralph, I'm starting already. But you know what? There are things we have to think about that other people don't. So let's be real. You have to be where you are safe. Maybe it means we have to do a little more research on what police officers have been like in that area, what the diversity or lack thereof is in that area. But your safety is it. And if you need help understanding that safety, this is where networking with other institutions is definitely helpful, because I will not have a staff member of mine traveling in an area that, because of their ethnicity, it is unsafe to be there.
And
Go ahead, Tamara.
I just want to say, so I think it's important to know the history of the area. And so, so that is, if you're going someplace that you've never gone to, read up on it, because I'll tell you, Tulsa was one of my first cities in my early years. And it's funny now, everybody's talking about, Wall Street, Black Wall Street and all of that. And I actually had a counselor who pulled me aside and said, do you know the history of this area? And so talk to me about Black Wall, not that they were anticipating that I'd have problems, but they wanted me to understand the ground that I was standing on. And so, which was, extremely helpful. And it actually taught me that lesson. I was like, I need to do some background, not that I might have found it, because obviously that often is a piece of buried history, but but I think that if you know, sometimes that is an important thing to ask. You know, maybe some people, you know, I'm going to this area for the first time. Does anybody know anything that I should know before I go there? And like put it out to the universe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and we want you to be careful and to take care of yourself and to make those decisions. But part of advocating for yourself is having that conversation before you ever get on the road with your office, with your travel coordinator, with your supervisor. What happens if I get to a hotel and it doesn't look safe to me? Do you have my back if I walk out the other side of the lobby and go to another hotel? You know, you've got to have that conversation beforehand, because we trust you to make that decision on the road, but it's better if you've talked about it beforehand and advocated for yourself in that way.
And I think that's where a lot of the professional groups that are out there, especially on social media, really kind of come into play, right? I think that we have a lot of groups out there that are more geared towards folks of color, right? And I think that we can have a little bit more of that frank conversation on some of the groups that are there. You know, there's like a Black Student Affairs Professionals group. There's the Table, that's a newer one. There, you know, there's these different groups that are out there, and these are opportunities for us as folks of color to be able to come to the table and be able to ask those questions and have those conversations in advance of the travel season and before you actually go out there. So, you know, making sure that you are definitely doing that. One of the things that kind of going back to the hotel piece of it is, you know, making sure that when you check into the hotel, if that person who checks you into the hotel says your room number out loud, you have every single right to be able to say, nope, that's not my room. I'd like a new room, right? I have had issues, particularly with women of color on my staff who have been harassed in hotels in some of the places that they traveled in small towns. You know, there was one of my colleagues, and she's fantastic. She was in a small town. She was staying overnight. She had done her research in advance, right? And looked at the hotel. I'm looking a little bit at the area. Yeah, it's a little bit tougher, but she made the decision and she said, you know what, I feel okay with it. And I said, okay, know that, you know, if you don't, you are free to move to a different hotel. You're free to get out of there. And she had to print something off at the business center that they have in the hotel, right? And so she says she's at the you know, one of the computer desks in the business center, and she hears the door open. It's a gentleman. He happens to be white. He's behind her. And he starts to walk in, and immediately she says, don't come any closer, right? Because she feels that he is coming closer to her. And she's like, don't come any closer. And she typically travels with mace. That is the way that Doreen travels. And so she had her mace with her, and she was like, don't come any closer, I've got mace, right? And the guy backed off, left the business center. She decided, you know what, I don't feel comfortable any longer in this particular hotel. And about 25 minutes away, a half hour away, was a much larger city. And she decided, I'm going to leave this hotel and I'm going to go on to this larger city and just get a hotel there, right? We had paid for the first night room at the one hotel. She still paid for this, you know, for the other hotel. Did not matter to me, because again, safety is paramount in that kind of a situation. Okay, so safety first is a big thing. Where you travel, I think that's, you know, for me, a really interesting one when I kind of think about it. And for me, I guess it goes back to my first year in admissions. I worked at a very small school on the west side of Cincinnati. And we were the type of school, there were 3 of us as admission counselors. That was it. We were the only 3 that did travel. And we only recruited in the Midwest part of the United States. We had Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. Those were the 3 states in which that we did our travel. And for me, my territory was kind of small town Indiana. I basically had the entire state of Indiana. So Indianapolis, okay, but had the entire state of Indiana along with portions of the state of Ohio. And, you know, for me, I think it was very much a wake-up call. You know, that first year of travel for me, navigating that as a person of color, crisscrossing small town Indiana, areas that I'm not familiar with, that I did not grow up in, and not knowing, am I going to get lost? What's going to happen? And this was kind of prior, this was when I used to have a travel binder that I would print off MapQuest, maps, and I'd use that. And it was really kind of prior to, the age of smartphones for sure. And it was a really, really interesting experience to travel in an area that I was not familiar with, that I did not feel comfortable with. But one of the hard things for us at that institution was that literally there were three of us. There were three of us that were really designated to travel. And so at that point, kind of coming to point 3, I did not know how to advocate for myself at that time. I did not know how to advocate to say, hey, is there any way that we can switch territories up where I can maybe just focus on the major cities in some of the different states, or are there different ways that we can adjust it so that I, feel a little bit more comfortable? And so I think really paying attention to, and it goes back to I think what Tamara really said about really doing that research and figuring out where is it that you've been assigned to travel, and then at that point, how can you potentially advocate for yourself for a switch in territory or for a tweak in territory. So, I want to throw it out, I guess, to my co-panelists. We really want to get a sense of if you've had to advocate for yourself in the past when it comes to travel and how you've done that. And Darryl, I kind of think about kind of your stories that you've kind of shared about apartheid recruiting, right? And maybe you can share a little bit with us about that.
So it all happened once when a colleague and I were actually in Pittsburgh, and this is my very first fall travel season. And we had a specific kind of car that our institution used at that time. And we saw each other, and each of us literally passed each other, did a U-turn, met in a parking lot, and discovered that the other was doing suburban schools, and I, of course, was doing inner city schools. We said, this is absolutely crazy, and we asked why, and the answer was because it was always done that way. So I asked a deeper question, and it was, well, why would one person be in the suburbs and me in the inner city? The answer, literally from one of my colleagues, not my dean at the time, but one of my colleagues, was, well, it wouldn't be safe for her, and she happened to be Caucasian, to visit inner city schools. And I was thinking this: you're talking about a school in the daytime, and you're saying it's unsafe. So what are you saying about the students that attend those urban schools? And more important, what are you saying about me? If it's too dangerous for her, why isn't it too dangerous for me? So we stopped the apartheid and separation recruiting literally 34 years ago. But what's more important for all of you, and Derek, you brought up this point, and it's very important, you do need to be a strong advocate for yourself. You need to tell people, I will not feel safe. And then you need to make that stick. And if you need help, again, your network, and Tamara's a good person to articulate the power of networks both within your institution and outside, but your networks can help to reinforce where you should and shouldn't be. And that was a story that ended well. There was, of course, another one in which I was in North Carolina in broad daylight, driving to give a speech, pulled over for nothing, and the gun was unholstered. These are real things that happen that in the past people might not have believed, but at least now people see that it's not really a wake-up call. It's just that people have been hitting the snooze button for 400 years.
Absolutely.
And I'll add that, what's nice is that once you get up to a certain position and you've had these experiences, actually I put myself in the way of that so that the staff doesn't even have to advocate for themselves. I will just be the person that says, you're not doing that. It's like, so, and so or, you know, I will be the one who starts the conversation on behalf of them. I certainly want them to learn how to advocate for themselves and everything like that. But there's just some things at this point that should not even be a question. And I just want to say that we concentrate a lot on areas that we believe in our minds to be racist. But let me tell you, there's some areas that you think, oh, sure, you know, with all of the colleges that are concentrated in this area, why wouldn't they be used to faces that don't look like them? And I can tell you, I've traveled in the deep South. I have done the drive from from Mobile all the way up to Birmingham, and and those type of things. I've done those drives. So, and believe me, it's not my favorite thing. I will also say the scariest moment I ever had was being lost in Providence, Rhode Island, and making the wrong turn and ending up in an area where I was honestly not sure that I was going to make it out. And so, because I stopped and asked for directions and then was followed to make sure I got out of the area that I was in. So, don't assume, I guess assume nothing. Obviously you don't want to go through this afraid. I mean, part of that is that you want to enjoy travel. And it's like, but at the same time, you just need to be, you just need to understand that, like, trust your gut, like Darryl said, or it's like, trust your gut. If something doesn't feel right, if, take different ways to get places, take the most go out of your way to drive someplace if it's going to be the better lit and the place that has more places where you could stop.
Absolutely, and I don't want to forget about intersectionality as well. I know we are focused obviously on persons of color during this session, and I'm just scrolling through the attendee list, and I may be making some assumptions, but it appears that there seems to be mostly female identified folks on our call this evening, and I think that there's also something to be said about the compounding of identities, right? I think when you think about being a person of color and being a woman on top of that, that there are extra things that you might have to think about. And Tamara, I don't know if there's anything that, when you think about that, like, are there anything that resonates with you in terms of that intersectionality for you? Or do you really feel like it's the Black thing?
I will say, no, it is, there are things that I think women have to think about twice over if you are, if you're going out to dinner, or you need to make sure that you don't, even how much you might drink if you're out on the road, or striking up a friendly conversation can seem nice, but all of a sudden it takes that turn, and you're like, okay, how do I extract myself from this area? And so I do think that there are things, but I also think that, I worry about my staff who, may give off the vibe of being part of the LGBTQ community, and, that they have to be safe. Even more so, I think, in some areas, especially if those identities begin to emerge, converge on each other, and honestly, you don't know which one is going to be more problematic. So you're like, at some point you're like, okay, can I, and it is I think you think that maybe as a woman you have more safety if you get stopped by a police officer. Well, Sandra Bland taught us that's not true.
Correct.
And I've done the DWB in Highland Park in Texas, and they basically were checking to make sure I owned the rental car, even though I gave them everything that I had, and I was dressed in a suit. But I do think there might be even that fear of you know, being assaulted. Like even if you were out and about, and then, you know, if you haven't carried yourself the right way, are people going to believe you in terms of that assault? Especially women of color get questioned even more so.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's one of those things that, you know, I think about, and part of it, I identify as a member of the LGBTQ community. And so for me, I think so much, I guess, in terms of intersectionality, because for me, it's okay. Is it going to be because I'm Black today? Is it going to be because I'm gay today? Like, what is it? What's going to be the thing that's really going to get me in trouble? And so, you know, again, I think that just making sure that we're finding ways to advocate for yourself. And I think this is a good moment to maybe dive into this Q&A question that we have that kind of came through, and just reminding folks that we do have the question and answer feature. But the question is, going off of Darryl's story, what would you say when someone explains that the counselor of color in urban schools is because they resonate and relate to those students better? What would you say to your dean, your supervisor, a high school counselor even that might, you know, suggest that? How, I'm going to throw that to the panel in terms of some initial thoughts there.
And that's, go ahead, Rob.
Well, I already answered a little briefly in the Q&A box, just that absolutely it's possible that the student could feel more make a connection with the admission officer of color, but when they get to the campus, who are they going to be interacting with? What is the community going to look like? And if your white staff can't make them feel welcome, can't make them valued, can't make them feel like they would be somebody who you want to have on your campus, then that's a separate problem that you have to address. And so you need to make sure that, sure, they might feel more comfortable if they see a person of color coming to them, but anybody who goes there better be able to make them feel comfortable too and feel welcome before they get to our campus.
I mean, are you going to come and call me every time a Black family shows up on campus for the information session? I mean, it's like, so, like, I mean, at some point, everybody in the office should be dealing, I mean, if you're recruiting well, everybody in the office should be interacting with somebody of a, you know, from a, you know, a POC background, or like who identifies as POC. And it's like, so how, you know, I mean, what's the barrier to them being as friendly and welcoming and opening? Yes, I think sometimes if you're just establishing a relationship with a school and you're trying to, you know, just show that there are people there who they may be able to connect with, I get that. But as Ralph says, it's, I mean, it's almost false advertising if all of a sudden they're going to get to campus and they're never going to see you or another person of color ever again. And so everybody should want to do this work. I mean, I want to know how to recruit other students. Why don't you want to know how to recruit the other side?
Anything to add, Darryl? Darryl just nodding his head.
My neck is going to be so strong after what Ralph and Tamara just said, but think about it. People of color always have to be the flexible ones who can visit a private school that is historically white and an urban school. Well, everyone should have that skill set. So my answer to the question is a question. Why isn't the same expected of everyone? And why can't we train people, or better yet, select people who have that comfort level so that we're not even asking that question? And I know that's a pie in the sky view, but ultimately, a person who can't be flexible enough to be at both types of school or the range of schools, I don't know if they're useful on a staff.
Yeah, I agree fully. I mean, I've told, you know, I've been managing staff now for 6 or 7 years, and I've always told my teams that all of you are multicultural recruiters, right? All of you are folks who have the ability, if you know how to build relationships, if you know how to talk to these students that we are trying to recruit, if you know how to talk to an 18-year-old, a 17, 18-year-old, regardless of rate, you should be able to do that regardless, right? And so for me, you know, I've always, and part of this, my background is in, I started basically as a multicultural recruiter. My first year, not so much, but during my time when I was at Xavier University in Cincinnati and my time at Loyola, I really oversaw kind of our multicultural recruitment efforts. And, when we've had events on campus that were maybe geared towards students of color, or, we were out there traveling in some of these different areas, I didn't care who you were in terms of your identity. You should have the ability to be able to talk and recruit and relate to any student, regardless of what that background is, right? I think that, when I am putting together territories for my team, yes, I try to pair folks up in territories that maybe they might do better at. But that has nothing to do for me with race or their background. It's more, hey, I've got someone who's from the Pacific Northwest. Guess what? I'm going to actually have that person recruit the Pacific Northwest because they have a familiarity with the area. They're familiar a little bit with the schools. They can relate to those students in a different way because they say, I went to this high school, or I'm from this area. I grew up right around the corner, whatever that might be. So, I try to find these different ways to find that point of connection, for folks as they're going through the time. Okay, I want to, because we are halfway through the session, and we still have a few more slides to get through, and so I want to touch on the microaggressions piece, right? So, you're on the road, you're traveling, you show up to a high school, and the person who greets you at the high school makes some sort of off-the-cuff remark. And here's maybe my best example. And maybe this isn't necessarily like a true microaggression, but it is something that I used to get quite a bit. So I worked at Xavier University in Cincinnati. And for those of you, obviously all of us are familiar with higher education in some way, there is a Xavier University of Louisiana down in New Orleans, and they are an HBCU, right? And so I oftentimes, often would show up at a high school, and I'd say, oh, I'm here from Xavier University. Oh, you're with the HBCU down in Louisiana? No, I'm with Xavier University of Cincinnati. Oh, interesting. And again, nothing very, very, very forward, but forward enough that I knew exactly what they were thinking about and what they were saying. And so I'm curious, how folks would handle those microaggressions. And for me, because especially I think earlier on in my career, was not wanting to push buttons. I wanted to stay it safe and that kind of thing. And, I would just say, oh no, I'm with the one in Cincinnati, but, I'm sure, they're a great school as well. And, I would just kind of talk my way around it. But, microaggressions is something that you are going to handle on the road, not only from the students that you're meeting with, not only from the folks that are at the high schools that you're going to, the staff there, but sometimes from your own colleagues from other institutions. And so, tips and tricks for this crew here in terms of how to handle some of those microaggressions.
Use grace and use class. This happened to a very young colleague of mine in the 90s who happens to be Korean American, but born and raised in the United States in the suburbs of DC. Remember, as we were preparing for this panel, I told you the story about my colleague who showed up for his appointment wearing a suit, carrying a briefcase, doing all those things, and speaking English like anyone else would, and literally was told to his face, we don't have many international students here, so what made you visit us? Well, rightfully, he was angry when he called after it, and he called my boss and a couple of other people, and he called me. But he handled it with grace when he was there. And he merely said, I'm not here to recruit international students. Because I've studied your school, I know that you don't have many. I am here to represent Gettysburg College to all of your students. It's a tough one, but I always recommend to people, even though I'm not as good at it, take a deep breath, smile to release the tension, and then state your intention as far as why you're there. But it's hard. Microaggressions that build up over a day, a week, a month can eat at you a little bit.
And sometimes I'll just act like I'll make them repeat themselves. I'm sorry. What did you just say? And like make them kind of think about it, like, you know, with a little tone to it and said, you know, is that really what you meant to say? It's like, so, I mean, I guess the one happened in a sort of I was hosting a counselor event, and this counselor basically said, what does it take? And like, you know, she sees me in my skin. What does it take for a good old white boy to get into the school these days? It's like, so last time I looked, there were still white people on campus. So, you know, still, I mean, they're not being kept out of campus. And so, but I mean, you know, I was also very fortunate enough that I had enough counselors who didn't look like me, who looked at her and said, you know, I have white students who get into the school, so maybe it's not about the color of the students. Like,
maybe your student just ain't like aren't quality.
So, but yeah, I usually give them a minute to rethink that. I mean, are you going to say it again? Are you committed enough to say that again? It's like, so, you know, so, and sometimes they are. And it's like, oh yeah, I mean, that's what I meant. I said, okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood. And then I'll probably walk away and not answer the question.
It's funny, I had a situation last night. So I was moderating a town hall for incoming families last evening, and we had two current parents of current students come to the town hall to share a little bit about kind of their experience so far with Columbia and how much their kids love the place and all of that kind of stuff. Great. And so one of the moms is talking about how her student likes to use the, we call it the U-Pass. It kind of gives them access to all the trains and buses here in Chicago while they're enrolled full time. It's great feature for the kids. And so the mom was like, yeah, my student loves to get around the city and she enjoys what she does. You know, she knows that there are certain areas that she shouldn't be in. So when she's on the red line, and she knows not to go south of Chinatown because that's when things start to get really rough, right? And so I'm moderating this panel. And it's kind of like me stopping in my tracks and quickly trying to think about, okay, how do I really address this particular situation, this particular comment in the moment? And one of the things that I shared after this mother had said this thing was that safety is your student's own personal feeling. And there are places that I might feel safe that your students may not feel safe. And there are places that your students may feel safe that I might not feel safe, right? Safety is your own personal feeling. And that was kind of my way to try to at least diffuse that comment, try to bring it back, because again, you know, I don't want it to be a situation where now these families are thinking, oh, well, if they go south of Chinatown, that means that something's going to happen to them in Chicago. And there's already, you know, we all see the media stories that, you know, they like to share about Chicago anyway, right? And so it's sometimes it is that quick thinking on the feet to really figure out how do you pivot something that maybe someone said into something that might be a little bit more positive as well. I want to read actually kind of verbatim, if you will, this comment that we got in from the Q&A, because I think that it's really interesting to share with folks. And this particular attendee said, for me, surprisingly, I had no problem with going to the more conservative parts of my recruitment territory as a woman of color. In one of the most known racially and socially conservative parts of my area, I was treated with so much kindness. Even a white male parent waiting online to get into the fair helped me carry my materials, and tons of students and families coming to my table at the fairs. The upsetting part is that I endured more microaggressions from the more liberal areas of my territory, and even confused for a truant student many times, followed and almost stopped by the police, harassed and yelled at by school safety and staff until they saw that I was actually a representative. Unfortunately, when trying to share these microaggressions with my predominantly white staff, It was ignored as if it was in my head. How many of us have gotten that it's in your head, or people, white folks, trying to make different excuses for our experiences and what it is that we actually go through? Happens all the time. Happens all the time to me. And luckily, you know, I am grateful that I have a very diverse staff. And so not so much in my current institution, but I've definitely had that happen. And I think that's a really good point that, you know, there can be areas that are more liberal. Sometimes I say liberal folks are sometimes even more worse than the conservatives, because of the way in which that they think that they view the world, the way in which that they think that they walk around the world, you know, and they say some of the things that are worse than some other folks. And so there are things like that, just to kind of keep in mind. So I'm going to move forward to the next slide.
Just keep aware of that. There's sometimes it's the folks who think that they know a particular community and are familiar with a particular community who commit more of those microaggressions because they don't know what they think they know. And just be aware of that and be prepared for that.
Yep. So this I think is something we really want to try to cover a little bit. What do you do if you're harmed during travel? And harming to me can be anything, right? I mean, it could be something like the microaggressions, right? You know, because that does cause harm to us on a daily basis. It could be, you know, someone was outwardly racist to you. It could be that you were in a car accident. I mean, like, what happens when you're harmed during travel? And these 3 points we wanted to really kind of put out there for folks is really developing a checklist for you. What is that checklist that you go through that maybe you develop with your supervisor, maybe you develop it within your team, maybe you develop it with other folks of color within your team or at other institutions? What does that checklist kind of look like that you go through? You know, for me, you know, anytime that my team encounters something, they know that the first person they need to go to is their direct supervisor, right? So they'll go to their direct supervisor, loop them into the situation and what's going on. That direct supervisor then will loop me into the situation, so I have an understanding of what happened with that person while they were out, right? I think about, you know, someone like Darryl with, you know, and Tamara, thinking about driving while black. You know, when you're going through that situation, how do you actually handle that? And who is your advocate? I think that's a really important thing to talk about, because there's obviously, I think, things that you need to do. Say you're in a car accident. Okay, do you have your insurance card on you? You know, there are things that I think are easier to kind of think about. But I think when you're harmed in a way that sometimes folks can't see, I think that's where things can get a little tricky. And so identifying, for me at least, identifying your advocate, your person on your team, your person, and that person could be me. You know, it could be something happens to Darryl and Darryl wants to reach out to me and say, hey, Derek, I had this kind of situation. How should I have handled it? Can I talk through it with you? Can I vent to you? You know, those are the kind of things that I think folks can think about. And then again, in today's age, recording footage, like, hey, you get pulled over by the cops and you're driving, maybe you just want to make sure that you have, you know, that cell phone camera on and just kind of ready just in case, right? So it's really making sure that before you're harmed during travel season, you do really want to try to have some sort of plan and action in place that you can take as you kind of navigate those specific scenarios, right? Are there tips and tricks from, you know, I'm 10 years in the industry. These folks have been doing it a little bit longer than I have. What kind of tips and tricks do you all kind of have when it comes to being harmed during travel and how to navigate that process?
Derek, you hit on the most important thing, and that is having people that you can call immediately who will hear and believe you. To the person who put that comment in the Q&A, we all feel for you because we know what that is like. You know, you would think now with video evidence, people would be less likely to have the it's in your head attitude, but this doesn't really change much. So it's not just having professional associates within your office, within your institution, and at other institutions whom you can call and just have them listen, but it's family and friends. I still make it a point of saying, listen, here's where I'm going to be. If you don't hear from me in 48 hours, you gotta ping my cell. You gotta let people know where I am. It might cost more, but for those reasons, I keep my location services on and I let people know how they can find me specifically. And it's all about understanding that these things, when racked up over and over, can give you a form of PTSD. Part of what we need you to do is have healthy outlets for it. So that might be me calling Ralph or Tamara or Derek and saying, let me tell you what happened. Although I will tell you, friends, that sometimes I only need to say that much. And then at that time that we're together, I just need to look. And the look that we share for those 5 seconds will be all I need to say about what happened and what's bothering me.
Tamara.
And sometimes sometimes you do have the privilege of traveling, maybe if you're going to places where there's going to be a college fair, if you're going to places where, it's a circuit type of thing, like, in New York, like, for example, we know that there's a week when we're all there. And it's like, so you kind of do touch base with people, and and I would look over and say, oh, somebody's not here yet, and like look to see at their table, say, I saw so, and then they just all of a sudden they run in late. I was like, okay, they must have been the subway or something like that. But looking out for each other is a big part of that. Like, at least, and sometimes you're going to be next to the same people for the whole week, and you start talking to them and like getting to know them. And sometimes the worst does happen. I mean, I was mugged at gunpoint in front of a school doing a school visit. And what was nice is that my boss knew that he couldn't help me, but he literally called somebody to come, and that's actually how I met Joyce Smith from NACAC. It was Joyce was the person he called and said, I need you to go and pick up my staff member because I think she's going to spend the night in her hotel room, probably curled up in a ball and crying. And so we went out for dinner and ice cream. But I think, and then, but having people that you can, just even, and definitely checking in. Like I tell all my staff, I know you're full-grown adults, but you're going to check in with me every other day. Like sometimes, and I need you to send me an email, send me a text, send me something to make sure that you made it to your next location. Sometimes I'll reach out to them, especially if they had an early morning type of thing, just to make sure. I say, I'm not checking up on you. I just want to make sure you made it okay. And the world is a real place. And so, things can happen. And also, they may just need to know if there might be something like weather or something that they, if they're not keeping track of something, I said, or I give them the permission. Like I'm looking at the weather. It does not look good. Are you okay to get there? Because we don't think about things like flooding and, the ability. I mean, there are real weather situations you could get into, and you need to, just cancel everything. That this is a place where your safety is the most important thing. And then in terms of being stopped, Facebook Live is your friend. I mean, it's like, if you don't want to feel like you're like making the situation more aggressive, you can quietly go Facebook Live. And that's recording, and at least even if they can't see you, they can hear you. And then people who are your friends are like, oh, hell no, like something's going on. And so it's like, and I probably shouldn't have used curse words, but it's like, but in any case, definitely use all of the tools at your disposal if you get in a tough situation.
Okay, I just want to point out that Tamara was the first one to use a cuss word, just so we get that clear. I put a comment in the chat about my first boss at Oxy used to call them sanity calls. But going back to the idea of the checklist, to me, it comes down to knowing who that second call is or that third call is. Hopefully the first one is not 911, but maybe it is. But is it to your boss, your supervisor, the insurance company, and then who comes next? Is it a partner, a spouse? Is it a colleague? Is it somebody else who's in town with you? Know who else you would reach out to in every time you're on the road. Who am I going to call if I need somebody to talk to, if I need somebody to come pick me up, you know, and have that on your checklist too, not just the official numbers, but have those sanity calls ready.
And there's a risk manager on your campus that I mean, if you're like, if your office is not engaging that person with travel, you should probably talk to whoever's in charge of your training and say the risk manager should be employed at some point to talk about what would be the institutional response. Like if I need legal support on the road, you know, who do I call to get that? And like, I mean, obviously, I still think the tree that, you know, Derek mentioned, your supervisor's going to call this person, that person's probably going to call risk management, and then like get the network working. But you still, you know, you want to make sure that you're already equipped, like with the insurance card and with the, you know, any of the like, and sometimes they might even tell you call your campus police, and so your campus police can be on the other end of or negotiating for you. So there's a lot of different tactics that you should know about before you even hit the road.
Yeah, and if no one's ever done that with you, you need to talk to your supervisor or your manager. Like, you know, these should be things that should be happening, in my opinion, every year prior to a brand new travel recruitment cycle. We're always making sure everyone's got the updated, again, insurance card, like it's all of those things. Everyone's got everyone's cell phone numbers program. You've got your supervisor's cell phone number. Everyone has my cell phone number in their phone. So it's all of those things that it should just be, in my opinion, again, like clockwork every single year, that you're getting those items together as you prepare for the next cycle. Let's talk, this topic we may not spend a ton of time on, but we wanted to throw this in here. Let me go back. In terms of like conferences, you know, one of the things that I think is also interesting about our industry is that, you know, yes, we do our travel on behalf of our own institution, and we're also engaging in conferences. And what does that look like? And what does that mean? And how do you actually navigate that space of traveling on the road at a conference? And, you know, the first point that we really brought up is, you know, beyond attendance, how do you actually navigate either being on a panel or, you know, if you're being asked to be on a panel? I know that, you know, there may be many of us on this call who are maybe starting to get into that a little bit more. You're being asked to participate a little bit more. And one of the things that I've always told, I shouldn't say always, I've probably been doing this the last couple of years at this point, is when I get asked to be on a panel, I always ask, who else is on that panel? Because guess what? I'm not going to be the only diverse voice on that panel. I refuse to do it. I'm not going to be the only black face. I'm not going to be the only brown face. I'm not going to be the only, actually, I will be the only male. I am totally okay with being the only male, but like there are certain questions that I do ask folks who want me to be on panels in terms of who's going to be involved, because I think that it's important, especially in this industry that we're in, that it's representative, that panel is representative of the people in which the students that we serve, the families that we serve, and the voices that should be around this table, right? And so, you know, I always ask, who's going to be on the panel? And they'll give me a list of people, and depending on who those folks are, I'll either accept it or I'll say thanks, but no thanks. Or what I've done the last couple of times recently, it's been more, hey, I would love to join the panel. However, I don't feel comfortable joining the panel. Looking at this list, it doesn't feel diverse enough for me. I'll say it to someone.
Yeah, and I have a little difference on the panels in the sense that I've been on more panels than I literally could count. At national conferences, at regional affiliates, at affiliates that I didn't even belong in. And here's the thing. People are tired of hearing from me. It's y'all's turn. You need to step up. If you haven't done this yet, you need to plan how you're going to do this, because we need new voices. We need new perspectives. People are tired of hearing from me, and I know it. And so that's what I want to emphasize here, is that you're thinking there, maybe you're out there thinking, I'm not ready. I'm not there yet. Yes, you are.
Yes,
your perspective is valuable, and we want you to know that and believe that, and we want to hear from you. So step up. If you need introductions or to folks or tips about how to do this, hit us up individually. But I think that you need to start thinking about that next step for yourselves.
For sure. When you think about kind of, this part is interesting about your views versus your institution's views, right? And how to navigate that kind of thing on a panel. I think a lot of times, and Ralph, I think really said this, me and him met kind of about this topic and really talked about clarifying who's speaking, right? Really saying from my perspective, I'm not speaking for Columbia College Chicago right now. I'm going to put that aside. I'm going to put on my my human hat, if you will. Here's my professional hat from Columbia's perspective, but here's kind of my human hat. And I think being very clear when you are on these panels, when you're going through the process, being very clear about how you're speaking, right? Making sure that you are clarifying who's speaking, no matter what forum it is. And sometimes, and I am not always the best at it, depending on the situation, but there are times that I will have to filter kind of my own stuff out, depending on the situation, because on this particular panel, maybe I really am truly representing Columbia. And so I really have to, provide that perspective. And luckily, Columbia and I are pretty aligned in a lot of our views, which is great. But, there are times that I have had to filter, some of my comments in such a way to just soften it a little bit more compared to how I might normally say that as a human being, right? And so, I think it's a point we wanted to bring up to just make sure that folks know that there can be a difference, obviously, between your views and the views of the institution that you're working for. And so you just want to be mindful when you are on panels, how you approach that. And again, I like kind of what Ralph said about, from my perspective, as a human being, from Ralph's perspective, here's kind of what
you just have to distinguish between when I'm speaking for the institution and when I'm speaking for my own personal views. And that's okay, as long as you're clear about it and upfront about it. I think that's the key, and that you'll do fine.
Absolutely.
But in the spirit of some real talk.
Come on, real talk, Tamara.
When you're first navigating conferences are interesting animals. They are, depending on the size of the conference, you're putting a lot of people together that, bring, and you hope they're all coming to this as wonderfully healthy human beings, but not necessarily. Everybody has their struggles. And then I'm thinking about all of the social times associated with conferences. And I think that, there's a reality that there are certain things that we could get seen doing that all of a sudden would not be, that if somebody else was seen doing, wouldn't be a problem at all. And it's like, so, and often there's going to be free-flowing drinks and fun times, and and so and again, there's no reason why you shouldn't have fun, I think, but you definitely need to protect yourself. I'm not even talking about your institution. I'm talking about your brand. You as a human being, you want to be seen in certain light. And I remember I've gone to a lot of conferences, but recently I went to a conference that was the very first time I'd gone to that particular conference. And people were, clearly there were a lot of people who knew each other. I did not know them. They did not know me. But of course they're like, oh, come and do this and come and do that and come and, oh, go up there and dance with and I was like, you know what? There are people that if I was at a NACAC conference and these people know me, then I might be doing some things like that because they know me as a professional, they know me as a person, they know who I am, and they would just say, oh, she's having a good time. They have the context to look at that behavior. I think that, like at a new conference, I'm not putting myself up there. I'm not, and I'm not taking a drink from a stranger. Just because they're in education, I'm not doing that. And so I think you do have to, at least when you're first starting out, but you also have to remember conferences are a great place to meet people that might pave the way to that next place you want to be. It's like, so, you know, while, yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean that you're actively looking for a job, but people are looking at you. And sometimes you can make, like, if you're on the right panel, or you're, you know, even if you're just navigating the, you know, the hallways, and people see you and they see their energy and they see, you know, how engaged you are, like people will notice. And so I think conferences can be a great place of opportunity if you do get a chance to go to one.
But those incidents, people are going to remember them forever.
There's so many people I remember.
Oh yeah, I have a friend who had something that they're not particularly proud of, and I was there, and I'm good with it, and we're good with it, but people still come talk to me about it. And it was 15 years ago, people, and it still gets talked about all the time.
Yeah, we don't have the same grace in many cases as our white counterparts. So you just got to be careful. You really do. Thank you for bringing that up, Tamara, because that's just a really great thing to think about. And like I said in the chat, like I do a little bit of socializing at NACAC, but again, it's very specific groups, right? It's I used to work at Jesuit institutions, and so they have a Jesuit network thing that they do. And so I know that I'm going to go to the Jesuit network. And sometimes I might pop in the Big 10 or Big 12 party that they might, but like, I'm not getting crazy at a conference. Because I don't want my name to be in my personal brand. And I love that framing of it. Your personal brand is so important at some of these conferences. And so it is important to be careful. The last issue, we've got about 15 minutes left, so I think we're doing well on time, is just some of the legal issues of travel. And so I'm gonna turn it over to our resident lawyer, attorney, law school graduate, Ralph, to talk through these.
I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. I just wanted to go over some basic ideas to make you think about it. Because the big thing about travel is that your school does have insurance. They do cover that rental car insurance. They are paying for that hotel. You are protected by your institution in most cases. The legal doctrine is something called respondeat superior. It means let the boss respond to the problem. But you're covered and you're part of that official insurance and everything else when you are in the course and scope of your employment. When you are acting in the course and scope means when you are doing the institution's business. And it gets really messy and unclear when you're out on the road traveling out of state. When are you doing the boss's business? When are you doing your own business? They've hired you to go represent them. They expect you to get on an airplane, to get a rental car, to drive to that hotel, to drive to that school. All of that is in the course and scope. Then there are the concepts that talk about the exceptions, which are things that are called frolic and detour. That's the legal concept. Frolic means that you're just doing something that's just for yourself and has nothing to do with your work. It might mean going out to the bar after you've already had your meal. Your boss expects you to eat. They expect you to get decent food, but they don't expect you necessarily to go out to a bar that night. That's your own business, and you might not be covered if something happens to you where you're doing that, okay? Detour is something less extreme. There are a lot of case law on this, and all the detour cases, almost all of them involve somebody ran over somebody in their car. A company asked somebody to go pick up a piece of equipment at a factory. The gentleman went to pick up the piece of equipment. It was near his family's house, so he drove to his family's house to stop for lunch. On the way back from lunch, he ran over somebody. Is that the company's business? He had no business going to go see his family, so probably not. But the cases, though, are all debatable. They can go one way or another. Let's do something that's a little bit more relevant to admissions, but it's kind of a gray area. You're covered when you're doing those visits. You're covered when you go out to meals. That's reasonable. What if when you want to go out to drinks at night, it's because a local counselor in Albuquerque has invited you for those drinks to get to know your school, to get to know some other representatives? that's a little bit more gray area. That might be seen as, you know, as a good representative of your institution. Getting to know a really important counselor like me is going to be in your institution's best interest. And so you actually might be covered if something happens there. You just need to be aware of it. Am I taking a risk here? Am I doing something that I'm doing just for myself? Am I willing to take this risk? And you might decide that, yeah, you think it's willing and you're willing to be responsible yourself, but just know that your school is not necessarily covering you when you're going on those things that are not exactly in the course and scope of your duties, okay? And you know, again, they're not all black and white rules, and you can argue either way, but just be aware. I'm covered when I'm doing things that are in the course and scope of my employment for this institution. And that will cover a lot of the things that you do on the road, and that's fine. But what if there's a political protest going on in this town and I want to be part of that? I want to be out there protesting because it's important to me personally. It's not important to your institution necessarily. You know, just learning to think about the difference between when you're acting on your own, things that are totally a frolic, things that are totally for your own personal benefit, and things that can be seen as part of the course and scope of your employment. And so that's all the basic idea that I want you to be thinking about and to be aware of. And don't let it, you know, scare you necessarily, but just think about it before you go out to those different events, and think about why you're doing it and who's going to be responsible if anything happens.
Excellent.
And yeah, just wanted to give that really quick overview, not get too technical, too much in the weeds.
So one thing I'll add to that is like, so when you're out and about, like maybe park that rental car, get an Uber, get something else. You know, like if you want to go out, like, you know, once you're off the clock, like make sure that anything that is collateral or kind of would be seen as this is the university's is secured. And it's like, you know, I mean, I think, you know, we've had people that went to lunch. They had all of their stuff and all of their equipment. That was all of the university's equipment. And they parked and they went to some place that they didn't know the neighborhood. Car got broken into. Everybody's stuff is gone. Computers, laptops, all, you know, like projectors, all the clothes, all, you know, it's like, and I was like, wait a minute, you left, I mean, like, everybody had their own backpack with their laptop. Why didn't you just take your backpacks out of the car at least? And it's like, well, you know, but we were just around the corner. It's like, well, I mean, and we covered it, but even if it's covered, it's a shadow on you for the rest of your time. It's, I mean, like, you know, that person, the IT, and the last people you want to make mad are IT. And IT just couldn't believe, and it has ramifications for the rest of us. From that point on, it became a thing for our office. Like, you know, like everybody had to, you know, understand that like new rules went into place and everything like that. So just make sure that, you know, anything that would be like belong to the office, kind of leave it alone and go do your thing. It's like,
yeah, agreed. So we have about 10 minutes technically left. We are at the end of the formal presentation, so I wanted to give folks just an opportunity if there are any additional last minute questions that folks have. If there's anything you want to put into the chat, anything you want to share about your experience, you know, we want to give you that opportunity, knowing that we have a little bit of time left. If there are no other questions or comments or anything, we're obviously happy to allow folks to reclaim their last 10 minutes here, but wanted to give folks an opportunity for any last minute questions.
And we obviously can just keep talking because that's what we do.
any Q&A?
No, I think we got all the Q&A.
Yeah.
So it's like Q&A is good this time. Yeah. Because if there are no other bigger questions, I will obviously move to dismiss or move to adjourn. There we go. Got to get into Robert's Rules of Order.
Well, as NACAC's chief teller, I will tell you, we're not using Robert's Rules of Order. We're dispensing those for now. But just a little plug, next week, the four of us will be talking about being a person of color in the office. Some of this will have overlap, but we will cover many of these same issues that happen to us while we're just working. But I have one closing thought regarding this topic. Take care of you. As was mentioned, know your surroundings, but stay connected to people so that should the unthinkable happen, you are covered and you are connected. It is very, very important. And again, to the person who posted the comment or question about the people who say it's all in your head, if they are still thinking that after all people have seen, those are people with whom you need to have a meeting that may involve human resources or a conflict negotiator on some level.
Good final words, Mr. Jones. Love it. Any other final words from this esteemed panel of folks?
And once again, on behalf of my students, thank you for all you do, you road warriors.
And I'll just say, I mean, I hope this was helpful, but again, one of the great joys of this work is, you know, getting to meet so many different people on the road. Enjoy that. This is how, we're here with you. It's like, because we get a chance to connect with each other. So, there's more joy than challenges, but just be prepared for the challenges.
For sure. Yeah, and just last thing for me, thanks again for spending the last hour and a half with us. I hope that you've gotten some good takeaways. I'm happy to see some of the comments here of things that some of you are planning to use, the next time you are out on the road. And hopefully you all will join us next Thursday, same place, same time. And we'll talk a little bit more about what's going on in the office. So otherwise, we thank you so much. Take care, have a great evening, and we will see you soon.
I think. Bye.